Welcome everyone, good afternoon. For those of you joining from a similar time zone, good morning and good evening to those of you joining this new edition of the Human Rights Conversations from wherever you may be. Today's event on digital human rights tracking tools is part of the Human Rights Conversation series, held live from Villa Moynier here in Geneva. It is a series that aims to, and well, today quite literally, zoom in on some of the most interesting updates from international Geneva's human rights actors throughout the year. My name is Domenico Zipoli, Research Fellow at the Geneva Human Rights Platform, and I'll be your moderator for the next 90 minutes or so. I am delighted to present to you today a truly dynamic and groundbreaking panel. Corinne Friedrich, Human Rights Officer of the Office of the High Commission of Human Rights, Camille Alonso, Principal of Human Rights Monitoring at the Equality and Human Rights Commission of Great Britain, Freedom Weinberg, Executive Director of Huridocs, and Ashley Bowe, Founding Trustee of the Impact OSS Trust, who will be joining us through a pre-recorded video. The choice to focus our discussion today on human rights specific information management tools is essentially threefold. Firstly, this stems from our ongoing research initiatives on local implementation of global human rights, with specific attention dedicated to the role of national human rights systems in the implementation of international human rights standards and recommendations of Geneva-based mechanisms. The second reason comes from the Treaty Body Review 2020 process we have carefully followed since its inception in 2014. This process has brought along a number of developments towards a more systemic and institutionalized state engagement with the UN human rights mechanisms. One major step, for instance, brought forward has been the push by the Office of the High Commission of Human Rights to establish national mechanisms for reporting and follow-up, in essence, standing permanent government structures with a mandate to coordinate and prepare reports to the human rights mechanisms, as well as to coordinate and track national follow-up and implementation of issued recommendations. Just last year, the final report of the co-facilitators, Switzerland and Morocco, benefited from ample participation by different stakeholders, including more than 100 submissions. And interestingly for us today, the number one theme among all has been that of digitalization. A reminder, of course, of the peculiar times we are living in today, but as well as a reminder of the value that well-functioning digital tracking may have for human rights promotion and protection the world over. And the third and perhaps most exciting reason for this event is the proliferation of innovative digital human rights tracking tools developed by distinct actors of the human rights ecology. As the panel shows today, international organizations, national human rights institutions, civil society organizations, as well as state administrations themselves, have been developing innovative ways to keep track of the implementation and follow-up of the many recommendations states receive from the different international human rights monitoring bodies. So we think it is useful to facilitate exchanges between these different sets of institutions and tool developers in order to enhance information sharing and, in the long run, sustainable solutions. So today we will be exploring a selection of such digital tools, with each panelist guiding us through the main functions, benefits, as well as the challenges that each respective tool presents to their developers, as well as us to their users. Before giving the floor to our first panelist, and in a way to sort of set the scene for the presentations ahead, just a few more words of introduction on the subject matter of today. One major aim of a functioning national human rights system is that of coordinating national data collection on the monitoring and implementations of recommendations from the international human rights system. This is not, of course, an easy task, as the reporting burden that states are subject to multiplies when considering the many issuing mechanisms: the United Nations treaty bodies, the Universal Periodic Review, and special procedures, of course, as well as achieving progress on the Sustainable Development Goals, all require targeted action, with hundreds of recommendations and obligations often overlapping in nature, with competing demands and priorities differing from country to country. In essence, the implementation challenges may be summarized as follows. Firstly, government ministries and other implementing actors working in silos with little coordinated approach. Secondly, implementation gaps. Thirdly, duplication of activities. Fourthly, inconsistent messaging. And lastly, low levels of engagement with the international human rights system at domestic level. So to counter these challenges, it is important to consider how the current system may benefit from effective measures of data collection in light of available digital tools and platforms. The discussion today addresses this specific question by providing an overview of 4 such tools. Some of the functions we will be exploring today include the tracking and thematically clustering of recommendations, linking specific recommendations from the UN Human Rights System to the SDGs, identifying responsible government ministries and/or agencies for implementation, developing follow-up plans, including timelines relevant to all domestic actors in order to facilitate a more coordinated monitoring of the implementation, and lastly, managing information regarding the implementation of treaty provisions and of the different mechanisms recommendations. So with this short introduction, let us now turn to the protagonists of today's conversation. May I remind the participants and the audience to please mute their microphones during the presentations, which will take place at this point back to back. After a first round of presentations, we will have a second, shorter round specific to the challenges that I mentioned earlier in designing, implementing, and sustaining the different tools. We will then open the floor for questions from the audience, although you may indeed pose your questions in the chat box in the meantime, if you prefer to do so. And as a last point of order, a recording of the event will also be made available on our website in the following days. So now it is my great pleasure that I give this digital floor to my friend and colleague, Corinne Friedrich from the Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights. Corinne, over to you.
Thank you so much, Domenico, and very nice to be here with you all today. I hope you can see my screen at the moment. And welcome to everyone online. It's great to see that so many people have joined this important conversation. My name is Corinne Friedrich. I work in the Treaty Body Capacity Building Program with the Office of the High Commissioner based here in Geneva. I work in the team that has been developing and rolling out this National Recommendations Tracking Database, one of the tools that we're discussing today. So I was going to see if we can spend some time to see what is this tool. So the NRTD is really as a web application that we offer to states. And Domenico highlighted in his introduction a bit that there's a lot of issues that states are facing. And I think this is one of the issues when it comes to coordination and information management. So this tool is really something that we have developed to try to support states in their human rights follow-up and reporting. So what you can see is all these mechanisms, so the treaty bodies, special procedures, and the Universal Periodic Review, they all have different mandate and functions, but what they all do is they produce recommendations. And this is really, so this is a recommendations tracking tool that states can use. And one of the parts that how this came about was really that a lot of states were starting to seek more support from the office when it comes to information management, how to do it, why can't all the information be in one place? And the office then, instead of having many states, let's say, developing their own tool, the office really tried to develop a generic application that can then be customized to every state, because of course, every state is different. So one of the things that can really be customized with NRTD is that the states can decide on thematic labels, they can change colors, and they can add their flags. They can also, we are trying now to explore localization of languages, so also non-UN languages can be used in the application, but most importantly, that it can be really mirror the government structure. So at the moment, who's using the NRTD? At the moment, we've been rolling out for about 2.5 years, and we have about 10 states, 10 plus states, that are rolling out the system in all different parts of the world. And the program I work with, which is part of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, which is the Treaty Body Capacity Building Program, which is really mandated by the General Assembly Resolution 68268. And the aim of this program is really to support states to really highlight and strengthening this importance of an institutional capacity and to provide technical knowledge on how to better report and follow up. And I would say one of the keys of this has been really to try to do this rollout that we've done with states to test this tool is that it's been embedded in a long-term structural capacity building effort. Often we say it takes about almost 2 years for a system to be up and running. So Domenico highlighted some of the issues, of course, that these tools that are being developed are trying to address. One of them, of course, is the high number of recommendations, sometimes also very similar recommendations coming from different mechanisms, and of course, the reporting obligation that comes with it. Many governments are struggling also because often they have this more ad hoc approach to coordination. So who is going to take the lead? What should be the actions? Who developed the action plans? Who validates the information? Who's doing the reporting? So one of the responses that we have seen from more and more states taking on board is to try to make these kind of national government structures that we call the National Mechanisms for Reporting and Follow-up. So part of the NMRF, this concept is really to have a better way of the government institutionalizing their own knowledge, to not just set up, let's say, a working group when it's time to do the reporting, but then to really have it standing. So the NRTD is really a digital application to support these NMRFs. So here we have the NRTD cycle, and this was just mainly to have an idea to show you how this system kind of works. And the first part is that all these recommendations given to a state. So first the government has access to it in the system. Then they can use it to plan what to do with these recommendations, what to prioritize. And then of course, within the system, it helps ministries to coordinate who should take the lead, who should work together. In the system, you can also then the implementation. What are you doing with these actions? For example, if a recommendation is to change a law, then the action can of course be potentially to prepare a bill to the parliament. Then the system will help to track, has the bill been submitted? So, is the recommendation implemented, partly implemented, not started? So it really provides a much easier overview for the state. And then of course, reporting back to the human rights mechanisms. So what have you been doing on the recommendations? What actions has been taken? What are current challenges? And then, of course, there's a real cycle. So then, then the government receives new recommendations. So it's really important to see this as a cycle. So one of the things, what is really, I think, specific with maybe the NRTD is that all the information that we offer to states in these specific databases that are given to them is coming from the Universal Human Rights Index. And I have in the chat, we will put the link. And I really encourage, if you haven't yet seen this database that the Office of the High Commissioner offers, I strongly encourage you to go and have a look. Because this is OHHR's global portal where all recommendations can be found, where you can track by filters such as SDGs, human rights groups, different human rights teams, and there you can continue doing analysis. So what we do with NRTD is we pull information from this index. So it means that when there are new recommendations, they come directly into the state's database. So there's really not that much of manual work that is needed. So here you can really see one of the steps, like just to highlight what NRTD can do. The NRTD takes the recommendation, but then it encourages, the system encouraged to really identify these key issues. Who should take the lead on the recommendation? Who are the implementing partners? What activities should be done to respond to the recommendation? What is the budget? What is the time frame? Furthermore, the system, and this is just showing you some screenshots, the system is much more dynamic in such, but just as we have a shorter period of time to just give you a feeling of it. And this would be that also it helps the different ministries that are engaging in reporting and follow-up to know who is doing what. So we have a lot of these dashboards that really shows which thematic issues are being responded to, what activities has been implemented, partly implemented. So it really gives the government a much better overview to see where they should be focusing their efforts. So with this said now, I really would say that what we've done with the last 2.5 years, we have actively engaged with our users. We're currently trying to revamp the system further, actually, because we got a lot of feedback, because the whole idea of any system, not just this NRTD, is to really make it user-friendly and to understand what does the government need and how can we really offer that in a smart and agile way. So what we're hoping to do in the coming, let's say, months is to expand on some of the features that's been requested by states, including to maybe have a more of a public site. So some of the information can also be shared with public, which is of course very important to have a national dialogue. And then of course, states are also interested who has this tool to share more in-depth experiences. So this was just to give you a bit of a view of what the National Recommendations Tracking Database is about. And I look forward to have your questions afterwards. In case you would like to have a demo or get in contact, you can always be in contact with us. And this is our email. So nrtdsupport@ohhr.org. Thank you very much. Over to you, Domenico.
Thank you, Karin. Thank you so much, and thank you also to all the team that is bringing this exciting tool forward. It cannot be an easy task either for the developers, not just for states tracking their own records. So well done for blazing the trail and in a way leading this group of developers in something that will hopefully become the norm in the long run. So now let's pass over to Camila Alonso from the Equality and Human Rights Commission of Great Britain. It's an interesting switch here in the panel in the sense that we have seen a tool that is specifically tailored for use by national mechanisms for reporting and follow-up, whereas the upcoming presentation by Camila will showcase a tracking tool developed by the National Human Rights Institution of Great Britain for the use of the NHRI, but also for a broader use for all of us researchers as well, interested, as well as civil society. Camila, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, and yeah, hello from London, and it's really nice to be with you all this afternoon. So as Domenico said, the Equality and Human Rights Commission is Great Britain's national human rights institution. And so a core part of our mandate is to monitor the UK government's progress in implementing its international human rights obligations. So in 2019, the Commission launched the Human Rights Tracker, which is a searchable online tool where anyone can learn more about human rights in Britain and track government progress in meeting international human rights standards. And we were actually inspired by the model that was first published by the New Zealand Human Rights Commission. And I know that a few other NHRIs have started developing similar tools recently as well. So we see the Human Rights Tracker as a one-stop shop for understanding the UK's obligations under the UN human rights system, how to engage with that system, and how the government is faring in terms of meeting its human rights obligations. So I will just share my screen now so that I can give you a quick demo of the site. And hopefully you can all see it now. So this is the homepage of the Human Rights Tracker. It's easy to find because it's just at www.humanrightstracker.com. And I'll just showcase a few aspects of the site now. So the first thing to show you is that the site provides guidance on how to engage with the UN human rights systems. So if I click on monitoring and reporting, it's being a bit slow. It should, yeah, there we go. It takes you through to the how to monitor human rights page. And there's information on this page about the different UN treaties that the UK's ratified, information on the treaty monitoring reporting cycle, some information on the Universal Periodic Review, and then further down a snapshot overview of where the UK is at under each of the reporting cycles, because obviously there are a lot of reviews that are running concurrently. So if you're interested in knowing more about a particular review process, you can click through. I'm just clicking on the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and it will take you through to a dedicated page on that particular treaty. I have a feeling the site might be being a bit slow because of the number of users. But on the page, you've got information about the treaty itself, links to relevant UN web pages, more detailed information about where the UK is at in the reporting cycle, and links to relevant documents such as reports that stakeholders have submitted as part of the review process. Going back to the homepage, another aspect of the site is that, as well as providing that guidance and information on the UN human rights system, the tracker pulls together in one place all of the UN's recommendations to the UK from the last round of reviews in one searchable database. So if I click on search the tracker, it takes me through to that database, and you're able to search through the UN recommendations received by reference to different kind of filters, as it were. So if I firstly just select UN recommendations, you can see it pulls up 474 results. We've then tagged the recommendations by reference to different human rights issues which align with the Commission's human rights measurement framework, and the human rights issues are kind of broken down or disaggregated in more detail depending on sort of what you're interested in. We've also tagged the recommendations by reference to different population groups and protected characteristics, as well as mapping them against the Sustainable Development Goals. So just to show you how it works, if let's say you're interested in the recommendations that the UN's made to the UK on harassment and bullying in school, you can see that it pulls up 6 recommendations. If you wanted to drill down further because you're interested in particular disability, for example, you can filter the results further and you can see that there are 2 recommendations. If I click through to the results, it will bring up the recommendation itself. So what we've actually done is we've sort of translated the original text into plain English to make it more accessible. You can also see the original UN wording below if you're interested, and also access a link to the concluding observations, which then takes you to the relevant UN webpage. So those are 2 functions of the site, and back in November of last year, we actually launched some new features to help users see what progress has been made on human rights in recent years. So I'm going to click on the check on progress page. And this takes users to a snapshot overview of how well the UK government is meeting its obligations for the different human rights issues that we've tagged the recommendations to. So it's a sort of traffic light system where we've assigned a progress status ranging from sustained progress down to regression. We've made those assessments for 25 issues so far, and the remainder, which are shown in grey, are going to be completed throughout the rest of this year. You can sort of click on one of the issues that you're interested in, and it will take you through to our analysis of the progress made. So on this page, you can see this is about the UK government's progress on mental health. You can see we've assigned a status of limited progress. we've set out our sort of summary of the progress made and links to underlying evidence. And you can also, in terms of related content, click through to an overview of the action that government has taken on mental health in the last few years in terms of relevant legal and policy changes. We've also published our methodology for undertaking those assessments of government action and progress on the website, so that that information is kind of clear and it's transparent as to how we've gone about conducting our assessments. So I'll just stop sharing my screen. So that's the Human Rights Tracker. We see it as both a transparency and accountability tool. So it provides clarity on this really important set of UN human rights standards and processes, seeking to address some of the issues that Karen identified in her presentation around kind of the number or volume of recommendations that overlap between them. It also equips people with the ability to learn about their rights and how to engage with the UN human rights system. And we use it to introduce the international human rights framework to new audiences. And it also provides clear analysis of where the government's falling short in meeting its international human rights obligations. So the UK actually hasn't yet established a national mechanism for implementation, reporting and follow-up. And we see the tracker as playing a really important role in filling this gap by providing a holistic view of progress, or lack of progress in some cases, in implementing human rights obligations across the different UN mechanisms. So I'll leave it there and hand back to Domenico, but very happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Camila, for running us through this great tool that you've developed in the last couple of years. I believe it's remarkable what you've done, and just by going through it, you can really see the use that can be made and what of it. And an interesting aspect that you mentioned here at the end is this sort of supporting role also to the OHCHR in a way. When a national mechanism for reporting and follow-up is not set, then the National Human Rights Institution comes in to help with its own tracker, which is a great show of well, common efforts amongst institutions. Very well. So now let's pass to our third panelist of today. Yet another actor represented in this panel, Friedhelm Weinberger, Executive Director of Huridocs, with their own digital tracking tool. Friedhelm, I give the floor to you.
Thank you so much, Domenico, and thank you, Karen and Camilla, as well, for the excellent presentations. It's really a pleasure to join. Before I get started also with the hands-on presentation, maybe a few words about Huridocs, which is maybe less of a household name than the Office of the High Commissioner. We are an NGO with a small office in Geneva and staff around the world working in a distributed manner. We've been around for almost 40 years, supporting human rights organizations to make the most of information. And what I'll be talking about today is a tool that we've been working on in recent years called Wazi, which is openness in Swahili. And it's a tool to organize collections of information. And it's used in a variety of ways to document human rights violations, but also to provide access to case law. And I'll be zooming in today on how it can be used to track human rights recommendations, commitments, and the like that we see. It's currently being used by more than 100 organizations, so a very big variety of contexts, and it's localized in all the UN languages and quite a few more, and also has interfaces that support working in right to left languages such as Arabic or Farsi, which we're very excited about. It's developed in the open. It's open source, and you can, if you are really curious, follow its progress on GitHub. It's something for the more, I guess, technically interested participants, but it's very important to us that it's not something that is done by a small team, but in the open as much as possible with the involvement of a wider community. But now to today's discussion on tracking and how it can be used. So we're particularly interested in tracking commitments and recommendations. And what it boils down to in technical terms, it's often about linking. So it's linking documents, or it's linking paragraphs of recommendations, and linking that to actions, as Camilla has just shown us as well. Or it's about visualizing progress or lack thereof. So we could think of this as traffic lights, we could think of this as percentages, or a mix of the two. That also means very often this is not about technology, it's about the methodology. And I think the great example of Camilla has shown us ideally about a transparent methodology. But it's important to note that a tool by itself will not create a methodology. I think the methodology has to be elaborated first and foremost. And that is often what takes the longest time, because it may be there, it may be implicit, and it may be necessary to be refined and structured as a tool is being evolved and developed. I think Karin's point of it can take 2 years to establish a partnership is a very good one. So I think it's important to not think of this as a turnkey solution tool in most settings. So then let's have a look at how this could look like in practice. The examples that I will show 2 examples, are quite complementary to what we've seen so far. They both take a regional angle. One is a collaboration with the Network of African National Human Rights Institutions, or NANRI. I'll share my screen to walk you through that quickly. So the Network of African National Human Rights Institutions is particularly interested in strengthening the engagement of national human rights institutions with African regional human rights mechanisms. So the African Commission on Human People's Rights, but also the sub-regional mechanisms, such as the ECOWAS Community Court. Their diagnosis is that not every NHRI is as engaged as it could be, and there's also a lot of potential for learning from each other. And also that much of this information in theory should be public, but in practice isn't. And that's not because people don't want to make it accessible, but it just happens to be in a variety of places. So with this database, what's being done is to aggregate information from both the mechanisms and from national human rights institutions, and then to link it to enable both learning from each other, but also seeing how and when there is institutional interaction. So what this looks like in practice, we can look at here, for example, at the activity report from the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights. And if we open this, this is a public website, and I can share the link in the chat afterwards. And it's loading, of course. What it will do, it will open the document itself, which is helpful. It will open the document eventually. I suppose this is why Karin was using slides in another live demo. Okay. There we go. So it will open the document, so we can have a look at it right away, but it also shows us information about the document. So in this case, the authoring institution, when it was published, what it is, the mechanism that it relates to, in this case, the African Commission, thematic areas, etc., etc. But it's also linking it to the state report, so we can directly compare the state report and the National Human Rights Institutions report, as well as the Commission's concluding observations. So we have all information in one place, including the documents themselves. And as we similarly saw on the tracker just now, we could also look thematically across different countries, across different mechanisms by keywords such as youth or water and sanitation. So if we were interested in a subject, we could also take a regional perspective. If we're interested in a country or comparing experiences, we could do that. Or if we're interested in a particular mechanism, we can take that angle. And the database allows us to combine those. The second example that I wanted to show is a collaboration with the UN independent expert on albinism that has, in a wider consultation process, elaborated a plan of action to better realize the rights of people with albinism. And that plan was elaborated, and was adopted and supported by a great number of institutions. And now this tool is helping track its realization, its implementation. And it does so in a number of ways. So it obviously provides access to the plan, but what I want to have a brief look at here is it breaks it down into its different pillars and then visualizes progress within those pillars. So if we look at the measures on public education in this case, we'll see through a map view in the traffic light system who's doing how well and where there's work that could be done. And if we change them to say ending skin cancer, we see a different picture. Similarly, we will also get access to the data here in the table view, so we can directly compare and use the scenario advocacy. If we were to take an interest in one particular country, let's take Kenya again as an example, we can also have a closer look, not on individual issues, but on the implementation within Kenya. And of course, it's loading again. But in a way, that shows us that there's a dynamic way to work for the data, to look at it in different contexts. In this case, a map and a table, and in the other case, a country overview that will provide a breakdown of the different measures, also of actions taken, and it would also show the organizations that could be contributing to the further realization of the plan. So there we go, it's loaded finally. We see contextual information, we see a summary, we see detailed information on progress. And then we could also have a look at organizations that are contributing or other work plans, international organizations involved. I'll stop here, but just to say that these are two examples of a flexible tool that can be customized in a number of ways, and happy in further discussion to bring in different examples or to clarify anything. Thank you.
Thank you, Freedom. Not one, but two tools are here presented today. And may I just add that this panel would not have obviously been a full panel without Euridocs present. Their work as the Geneva human rights NGO that works to link technology and human rights is really outstanding. And every time that I hear the projects that Freedom and his team develop, it makes us here at the Geneva Human Rights Platform even more keen to explore these innovative venues further. Very good. So now we have our fourth and last panelist, Ashley Bowe from the Impact OSS Trust. He is based in Fiji, in Suva in Fiji, so he has kindly prepared a pre-recorded video for us on the Impact OSS version that has been used by the National Mechanism for Reporting and Follow-up of Samoa, called SADATA. So if I may ask Yasmin to play the video for us. Well, here is Ashley. The floor is his.
From Fiji here in the Pacific, and thank you so much for the opportunity to be part of this conversation today, and particularly to the Geneva Academy for facilitating this very timely conversation. I'd also like to acknowledge my fellow panelists as well, Friedhelm, Karen, who I know very well, and Camilla with the Equality and Human Rights Commission, who I've worked with many times in the past before as well. So thank you so much for the invitation. Domenico asked me to speak for 3 or 4 minutes on Impact OSS, which is one of the tools that's emerging out of this space in response to the reporting burden and the acknowledgement that there needs to be a more strategic approach to implementation of human rights at the national level. I don't think I will quite stick to 3 or 4 minutes. I'm afraid I might go over by about 4 or 5 minutes, but I ask for your forgiveness on that, given I won't be able to answer any questions. So here we go. So I'm going to give you an overview of one of the national deployments of Impact OSS, and this is Samoa's version, which I've called SADATA. and this is their landing page, and you'll immediately see that you can enter enter data either from a human rights perspective, their national development plan perspective, or the SDGs. So we'll go in through the human rights perspective, and straight away we can see an overview that they've got 694 recommendations, 7 in draft, 56 actions and several in draft, and all of these indicators as well. So what I'm going to do is take you through from a chronological perspective that a state would go through. So they would receive a set of recommendations, and they import those recommendations into SData using a batch import feature. It would also be possible to automate that process with the Human Rights Index as well, if any country wanted to do that. And what they do once they've got these recommendations is they start to cluster them to make them more manageable, and they can do that either by filtering using human rights issue, affected person. So they could click on affected person, say, okay, we want to create a cluster around detainees, and they would get the 28 recommendations, and they could create a cluster around detainees. Similarly, if they wanted to do it using prisoners, they could start to type prisoners, and they get 22 recommendations, and they just click this button here, and it selects all of the recommendations across all the different treaty bodies relevant to prisons, and they can create a cluster. And what Samoa's actually done as well is it's gone beyond just the recommendations, and it also has their National Human Rights Institution recommendations, their Law Reform Commission recommendations, and the substantive articles of all of the treaties that they've ratified as well. So they clustered their recommendations to turn the 700 into 20 or so clusters that are more manageable for implementation. Then they start to add actions. So they go onto this tab and they start to add actions. And currently they're up to about 60 actions. I think they've got a lot more on their live site. And once they just click on here to add actions, and then these actions can link to clusters of recommendations, and they set indicators for each action as well. And when any data is due, Impact OSS sends out automated emails to the people that have been identified as the data owners, and they just click on a link and the information gets tracked. And what happens is it gets tracked against every single recommendation that it's relevant to. So you only need to upload the information once, and it tracks it against everything. But yet when it comes to the reporting, you filter it by your particular treaty body or UPR, and it only brings up the actions and the evidence and the data that's relevant to that particular treaty. So Samoa has this implementation plan that they work on. So they add the actions, and they've only got 61 actions in this test site. Remember, this is the test site, but we can already see if we go back to the recommendations, what this allows us to do is select without actions, and we can see how many recommendations don't have implementing actions. So already we can see that just by adding 60 actions, it's addressing or partially addressing around about 475 recommendations. So just identifying that overlap alone is just an incredibly powerful tool in terms of achieving effectiveness and reducing the reporting burden. So Samoa's now building their implementation plan, and this is what it looks like. So it sends out these automated email reminders, and the national mechanism meets every quarter, and they scroll down here and they can see where there's information that's overdue. It appears in red. But this is a public site, remember, so it's not just about the state being able to coordinate and track the implementation of human rights, but it's also for civil societies too. So civil society can engage in two ways. One, they sit on the national mechanism, so they can engage with the government directly at the quarterly meetings. Secondly, any civil society organisation can visit the public SData website and upload their own information against any of the indicators. So if they're doing some work around, for instance, the law and justice sector, and they click on the relevant indicator, and all they do is click new report, and they can submit their data as well. Samoa has chosen for that not to be automatically published. They get an email saying that that information has been received, and they can then choose, they can review it and then publish it if they wish to. So there's that data quality control mechanism that's built in. And that's one of the features of Impact OSS. It's very flexible to meet the national context, because whilst the challenge is broadly the same, the national context can be very different. So that's one of the key features that Impact OSS has that enables it to be adapted to the particular national context. So then SAMAR goes through the implementation cycle, and just they're able to identify where the gaps are by 2 clicks of a button. Once they've added recommendations, they cluster them, and then if they want to do a gap analysis, which would normally take someone weeks, instead they can just click here and they can see which actions by 2 clicks of a button don't have any implementing actions, and then they can either identify what's already planned and add those in, or they can identify new actions that will need to be taken as well. So that's how it works in a nutshell. I'm just very conscious of time, but the last thing, and I hope that I've spoken to the points that Domenico has asked me to speak to, but the other point that I would like to speak to is that maybe what differentiates Impact OSS is its flexibility across other frameworks as well. So we saw from the landing page that we could enter from the SDG perspective or Samoa's national plan perspective. So what Samoa has done is it tracks all of those 3 frameworks using Impact OSS. So we can click on all frameworks here, and all of a sudden we get all of the SDGs, all of their goals within their national development plan as well. And there's cross-tracking across all 3 frameworks. So what Samoa has done recently is it's uploaded all of its information that it reported on as part of its VNR for the SDGs. And now they're about to do their UPR report. So all they do is they filter by, so they go to actions and they filter by human rights body, and they filter by UPR, and it brings up all of the data that they reported on through the VNR. So they don't have to go through that same whole process again. And it's the same with their national development plan. As they track the national development plan, it tracks it against all of the relevant human rights recommendations, substantive articles, the National Human Rights Institution recommendations, plus the SDGs as well. So Impact OSS allows any country, not only Samoa, but to say, well, we don't want to just track human rights, we want to track this framework as well. We want to track our climate action plan, for instance, and have that added value across all of the frameworks. So Samoa's chosen these 3 currently, but they're considering expanding it to cover all of their environmental commitments as well, and it can keep growing. So yeah, so that's it in a nutshell. It's open source, which means that it's free to use and free to people to take the code and do what they want with it, and that's why it's so flexible, really. So part of the upgrades that we're doing in this version that I'm showing you here for SEDATA, they will now all be freely available to anyone else that wants to use the tool as well. So yeah, again, I'd just like to conclude by saying, commending the Geneva Academy for facilitating this conversation. I think it's very timely. It really is a growth area here, and I think the understanding of what works and what doesn't work is growing all the time. And also to acknowledge the fantastic work being done by the National Recommendations Tracking Database and in the UK with their tracking tool as well. If anyone's interested in exploring Impact OSS anymore, I'm always happy to have a conversation. Please just ask Domenico and he'll be happy to pass on my contact details. But all the very best for the rest of the dialogue, and yeah, have a nice afternoon. Thanks very much.
Wonderful. Well, thanks to Ashley for sending us this very precise and, again, in-person run-through of how SEDATA works. Throughout the presentations, I think we've seen how much simpler it is really to even have a first glimpse of the steps taken by each and every government that we've covered, but not only, of course, from a government's perspective, but including the inputs from other national human rights actors. The fact, of course, that some of these digital tools can be, accessed online, I think is an absolute plus for us researchers. And there are reasons for them being open or non-open source. So with this, I think we have concluded, as far as I'm concerned, the first round of discussions for this panel. I would invite, I've seen that in the chat, there's been a flurry of exchanges. I have already a couple of questions ready. However, I would invite, of course, other participants to raise, in the audience, to raise their hand as well if they would wish to come in the conversation with questions or comments regarding the 4 tools, or of course the digital human rights tracking movement, let's call it, you're welcome to do so from now. Before opening the floor, just 1 second quick round of comments from our panelists. And this time I'd be more precise on, yes, the direction of their comments. And this part, please 2-3 minutes each if possible, wishes to tackle the challenges that you as tool developers are facing in making these innovative and very useful tools available to us all, but also perhaps those challenges that could be foreseen for the users in the long run. As I said at first, it's not too much of a Pindaric flight to see this as becoming the norm in the long run. So these challenges, I think, if discussed, you know, in common forum like this, will hopefully lead to more sustainable tools in the future. Perhaps we change the order. We start with Freedom, Camilla, and Corinne, if that's okay with you. Yes, Freedom, over to you.
Of course, yes. Such an interesting question. I think one thing that we've learned working with a variety of actors from NGOs to national human rights institutions, including also with regional organizations, is it's really important at the outset and throughout to be checking in on the goals, on the capacities and the availability of data, and also the risk of sharing or accessing data, and thinking this through in a coherent design and working then backwards on what's possible, what's not possible, because there is a tendency to have high hopes and then to hit a wall with any of these. So if you are a small NGO of 5 people, your capacity may be different than if you are the Commission on Human Rights in the Philippines, which has more than 700 staff. There's no magic there, but I think it's important to scale the ambition related to that and to understand that technology can enable this, but it's not necessarily a silver bullet in terms of efficiencies. And then it's important for us that contexts are very different and there is no one-size-fits-all solution. But it's also not ever sustainable to have bespoke solutions that are only geared to a specific context. For that, all of us are too small. So what we're trying to do is to have adaptable solutions that can be adjusted to context, but that can be maintained for a wider community. So that's where we've gotten to, just because we've seen things fall apart if they were too bespoke too many times. And maybe the final point on this is perhaps something that connects us to a bigger set of thinking, is that technology on its own is never going to be what leads change, but it's using it in a strategic way and using it informed by wider strategies. So if we're concerned with better implementation of recommendations, to focus on that and not on the capability of the tool, and then to understand how could a tool help us or not do this, and how could it possibly better help us compared to other possible activities. So I'll stop here, but those are maybe the points that I'd highlight.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Freedom. Very clear. Camilla, would you have some challenges for us? Thank you.
Yes, sure. So I guess the first thing to mention, just in terms of design, it's obviously important to be clear on the scope of the tool that you're developing and, you know, which human rights mechanisms it should cover. So, you know, we had to think carefully about the breadth of what we were trying to cover on the tracker. Our tool doesn't cover the UN special procedures, for example, as we decided to focus on the treaty body and UPR review processes and recommendations. And that was based on the specific need that we'd identified, including through user consultation and testing. But we have had users ask us since launching the tool, you know, why it doesn't cover special procedures. And I spotted a similar question in the chat just now about whether it covers those and also relevant case law. And I guess I'd just say, you know, it's important to be realistic about what you can cover. That will in part depend on the resources available, but also the purpose of the tool, and making sure whatever you're doing to build or add to the tool is clearly aligned with that, because our human rights tracker isn't simply a kind of repository for all information on human rights for the UK. It's got quite a specific purpose. And then in terms of both implementation and sustainability of the tool, given the resource that was put into developing the tracker, it's obviously really important to us to ensure that it's actually being used by relevant stakeholders. So they need to be aware that it exists and understand how it works and how it can be useful to them. So as Frida said just now, it sits within a part of a wider strategy around increasing accountability and scrutiny of the UK government's human rights obligations. So to address that, alongside developing the tool itself, we've rolled out a capacity building programme where we've provided training to a range of stakeholders on the International Human Rights Framework and how to use the tracker in their work. So we've given training to a number of different audiences, including civil society organisations, government officials and lawyers, parliamentary staff and students, in order to sort of build up a user base. And we found that to be a really effective means of kind of, making this a sustainable tool.
Thank you so much, Camilla. So then here, the role of digital human rights tracker tools, not just helping towards a stronger protection of human rights, but also a promotion aspect, which I think is something that we hadn't mentioned so far, and it's good that we're highlighting it now. Thank you. Corinne, over to you.
Thank you. No, thank you so much for everyone who's part of the panelists, and great questions in the chat. Keep them coming. I would say with all of these tools, they are responding to different, let's say, actors, if it's civil society, NHRI, or if it's a state, but many of these issues can also be the same. And I think one of the things we have really seen with the NRTD is it's a very high demand for the tool, because it's easy to think it's a quick solution for something that often requires what we say a structured approach, which comes with the setup of an NMRF, so a coordinating mechanism. Then it really takes, and what we do with NRTD, we have a really long, and I mean 5 to 7, 8 workshops where we're training government officials who's going to be using the system, where it's really about setting up a protocol, who's using the information for what, who's validating information, because really the system will not work without drivers. It needs drivers. And what often we can see when it comes to government, that there's sometimes a high turnover. So how to ensure that you build a tool and a structure around it, that when there are high turnovers or there's a new election, that the system then just, it can continue. So I would really say the fact that having this institutional structure of any tool is really important. So developing a tool is just one thing. And technically, many things are possible. And that's what we can see now from a lot of states who are requesting us for, features. Can you do this? Can you do this? Yes, many things technically possible, but it's really about, it also needs to fit with the political landscape. Another thing I would really put is how we can make rather complex processes practical. So let's not make things that are maybe not that complicated, but we really like to make them complicated. So the systems needs to really represent the workflows, right? So, and the only way to really understand it is to understand and engage with users. So sometimes we start with something and we think we are knowing it and we know how to do it, but actually we need to be agile and be ready to change, because actually we might not know exactly what the needs are. And we can see this now after 2.5 years, that we have much better understanding what we should be working on and what the tool should be about. So we really try to keep a high user focus throughout the whole tool, let's say the whole journey. And another part maybe that I think with NRTD specifically is the fact that it's available in different UN languages. At the moment in English, French, Spanish, Russian, and Arabic. But many other governments, they need it to be in their local languages. So we're really spending a lot of time now on a generic application, meaning that, most of the people reporting in states, they might not want to report in these languages, especially not in English, right? So we're really trying to see how can we make this a real global tool. So this was just a few additions. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Corinne, and thank you for showcasing how the tool that we've been seeing, the different tools that we've been seeing is really the tip of the iceberg, and the work behind this is really I mean quite outstanding. And I guess also the amount of people that are involved in such tools, in the population, in populating such tools is quite high. So we are now in the Q&A question. We have 30 minutes. I would give precedence to the so far two people that colleagues that have raised their hand. So first of all, Selina Kafle from Trial International. Selina.
Hi, thank you, Geneva Academy and all the panelists. I actually had a question for Camilla, but she addressed it. I'd also like to use this platform to share the digital platform that we created. I'm based in Nepal, and there are about 26 cases that have been taken to Human Rights Committee or treaty body. So we realized that many of the NGOs, civil society organizations, students do not know about all these cases and their recommendations and its implementation status. And also we thought that there should be a tool which would actually help to help these people to learn about it. So I just like to share my screen if I'm allowed, and just just make a small tour of the website. Would that be possible?
I think we might need to, with the sharing of the screen, I might need to see with...
yeah,
she can start sharing her screen now.
Okay,
yeah.
great.
Thank you very much. So here is the, I'll also post the link of the website in a while, but here's the website, which is Real Rights Now. So it looks like this. We have the homepage looks like this, and we have tried to keep all the cases that have been taken to Human Rights Committee so far. So if we go through each case, we can click onto the case and we can see the facts of the case. In summary, if you want to read more, there are links to read more. And since the Human Rights Committee also requires exhaustion of local remedies, we have also tried to put on what the victim had to go through during the national legal mechanisms to get justice. We've also tried to put the recommendations, and to track the implementation of it, we have graded the recommendations provided by Human Rights Committee. In most of the cases, Human Rights Committee has not yet graded the recommendations. So on those cases, we have discussed with the author and graded it in coordination with them. We can also see that there have been different times that we have made efforts on the implementation, like writing the letters to the government authorities and holding meetings with them, but none of them have been successful so far. Nevertheless, we have also listed it down, so that it's easier for the viewers to know about the implementation status. We have also built a separate chart which actually tries to show the implementation level of these cases. We relaunched this website recently, so the website is still under work, and there are other cases that needs to be added in this chart. But if you go through this chart, the colors here represent the level of implementation, which you can see, and which are moreover responses received by the government but no follow-up or such. So I think this chart helps to understand more easily about the implementation status of these cases. This whole website was initiation of organization called Trial International and other partners, which was joined by Human Rights and Justice Center, a sister organization. So I think the highlight of this particular website is that it allows the researchers or others to know about all the cases. It's a one-stop center where it provides information, as well as I think it's also a medium for us to coordinate with the government to make them realize of their state obligations. Recently, when we launched it, we tried to invite the government authorities, and most of them were not present there. But like Camilla said, I think in the future it would be we can also use various capacity building programs to the government authorities on using this platform more and trying to understand more of the implementation level and their state obligations. Thank you very much, Dominic. I'd like to stop here so that we can listen more. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Selina. And I think that from this short presentation on yet another tracking tool, we can see not only that there's quite a number of institutions out there. I saw that in the chat we have also a colleague from the Human Rights Measurement Initiative, which is of course a very important player in this field, which makes us even more keen to continue facilitating these sort of conversations in the future. The second point, which here we go. Sorry. Here we go. The second point that I thought was interesting from the Trial International tool is the more qualitative approach. And from a social science methodology perspective, there's pros and cons in this. But of course, if one wants to have a fast bird's eye view of specific cases, that more in-depth, subjective, qualitative approach to the tracking is absolutely necessary. It takes more time for each, so that's of course a probable challenge. But thank you so much for giving us your example. The second speaker, Sarah Ratrai from UNDP. I think you've raised the hand as a second.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah. And then we'll go with the questions from the chat.
Can you hear me okay?
Very well.
Hi, good morning, everyone. It's morning here in New York. It's a pleasure to join the session. My name is Sarah Ratrai from the United Nations Development Programme. I think there's a number of our colleagues that are on the line here. And we're very interested in this topic. So thank you to all the great speakers. It's been really very interesting. And we are working on a number of these different approaches. We're supporting the NRTD database in I think 14 countries and UNDP country offices. And also we have obviously support national human rights institutions in many contexts. But I want to actually raise a different issue that I think is very important for us in the human rights community and also in the development space. And it really touches upon how these systems that we're putting in place, including these really critically important digital tracking mechanisms, how they are essentially interfacing with national planning processes and efforts to achieve the SDGs. I think the last speaker from Impact OSS, obviously was able to correlate between these different tracking approaches. And I know that there's work ongoing in this respect in relation to the NRTDs, and we're working with the UN Human Rights Office thinking about new ideas and new ways of doing this. But some of the feedback that we have and what I think we need to be thinking about very intentionally when we're designing these systems from a human rights perspective is in terms of end use, how they will be utilized to decrease these kind of siloed approaches, which human rights often get sort of pocketed in at national level, and how we can really integrate the recommendations and follow up in these tracking approaches into national development policy planning, including specifically for the SDGs. We know, of course, there's 90% of SDG targets correlate to human rights obligations of states. So to me, they're of course completely naturally aligned and they should be integrated systems-wise at country level, but that's not what we're essentially seeing. I don't want to talk too long, but I'll just mention we've had a couple of regional meetings with governments and UN country teams and UN actors on this specific topic. And more often than not, we found that these processes are completely siloed at country level. They don't talk to each other. And the consequence of that is, of course, that SDG and national development planning processes aren't taking into account the rights basis elements and vice versa. And I think there's also a tremendous efficiency argument to be made to governments in terms of having integrated systems here. One of the previous speakers just spoke about the VNR and the SDG processes. New guidance from DESA to member states on SDG reporting emphasizes the importance of human rights reporting. But we still see more often than not countries gathering information in all these separate processes when they should be multiplied for effect. So my comment is really on that issue, particularly in how we can make that more of an implicit aim and objective of these processes and not sort of a byproduct, which I think sometimes it is. And we're trying to really break down those silos, because we will end up with very nicely developed systems, but that they don't speak to each other. And I think I want to also second the point that Karine made regarding capacity building and support. She was speaking obviously about the great programme the office has to support the NRTD. I think in order to make these processes livable and for them to be sustainable at country level, they really need to be embedded through the various systems, processes, mechanisms, but also certainly the UN system plays a very important role building capacity, but of course civil society and NGOs, etc. So how do we do so in a way that also brings these systems together? I think we should be challenging ourselves to ask these questions more intentionally in design and in usability and impact discussions. So I know there's other colleagues on the line from UNDP, some of whom have worked at country level on these tracking mechanisms, so I'm sure we'll have other points to make. But I want to mention that and to thank you again for the session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I can see that Tanzia Hack has raised her hand, but just in terms of timeline, there's a couple of questions that have come up. I'll mention 2 further questions after Sarah's. So Sarah's question on how these tracking tools may help to counter the siloed approach the governments, many governments are currently playing with or working with, and also the link digital tools capacity building. So this is the first of the questions. Then we have an interesting question from the chat saying, do we have a global tracker uniformly used across the board, or is it country-based and UN/OHCHR linked? So in essence, this brings back to the question of uniformity of tracking versus different models of digital tracking tools. So this is the second question, and then the third question, and I will then open the floor to the panelists. How can these applications be implemented in countries that have very different laws pertaining to data tracking? In terms of replies, I think that we can go in order of the panel. So the original order: Corinne, Camilla, Freedom. Any replies to those 4 questions? I'm sorry for the amount there, but if you have questions on any one of those, please.
Thanks. No, I think it's great. And I think we try to start off and respond in the chat to the global tracker. I think at the moment there's no of these global tracker. And I think there's different tools out there. One of them is this Universal Human Rights Index. It's also EFRIS from the Council of Europe, which is, of course, it's not a tracker in itself, but it's at least it's where you can go publicly, download information, and start to see and do your own analysis. But there's this global tracking of implementation, for example. That tool, based on my knowledge, doesn't exist yet. But I think there's a lot of things out there. And I think also, like Freedom and several of the panelists has mentioned, this importance that we're not that many players within this field, and we might be serving different groups, but overall we serve everyone, right? So I think that's really key of how do we work with open data. And I think that's one of the things we've done with the Universal Human Rights Index, hence it's feeding the NRTD, but plus we're feeding many other organizations and NHRIs, because all the data we have is open, right? Which means that I saw one of the questions was from a participant from Bangladesh, how to get access to the information, etc. And I think this is it, really. If you want to have the access to the information, it's possible. Then, of course, building a more sophisticated system might be a bit more complicated, but at least the information is there. To Sarah's point, I really fully agree. I think it's really important that we don't work in silos. One of the ways we're really trying on the NRTD side is having the NMRF. We always have Ministry of Development, Ministry of Planning. I mean, they need to be part of these conversations, because otherwise very similar issues are being discussed by 2 different, let's say, parts of the house, let's say, and then there's no coordination. there's parts of governments who've been interested in NRTD, not always to report back to the human rights mechanisms, but actually because they see that all the recommendations in the system is pre-tagged with SDGs, goals and target. So when they're doing this, they can actually very easily do this double reporting. So I think that there must be a much more, let's say, strategic push from all actors to really speak about the synergies between these two agendas. So I hand over to my fellow panelists. Thank you.
Camilla, any of the 4 previous questions, if you have a response to these, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I mean, Karen's just covered a lot just now, but just a couple of comments from our perspective, I guess, given also that we have a slightly different focus for our user base and our tools, obviously, in the absence of a national mechanism. But in terms of, I agree completely about the need to avoid a siloed approach to implementing, UN human rights obligations and the SDGs, and in the UK, Sarah, I'm sure you know, but responsibility for the different UN treaty mechanisms and the SDGs is split across different government departments, and we try to play a role in kind of convening those actors in meetings because of there being no national mechanism, and we very much see the tracker as being important in helping those different actors see the overlap in the recommendations that they're working on implementing. And that's also why we mapped the recommendations against the SDGs too, to just show kind of how cross-cutting they are, and how government should be looking at making progress in a holistic way, not just focusing on kind of mechanisms individually. The question around sort of how to implement a tool like that in context with different laws around data, I think that might have been posed when I was showcasing the tracker. I guess it's worth just saying that with our tool, all of the information on there is drawn from publicly available sources. So, obviously the UN recommendations themselves, the information about the different treaty processes, but also our assessments of progress are drawn from publicly available information, whether that be official government statistics, research that's been published separately by our Equality and Human Rights Commission, or by parliamentary committees or civil society or academics. So we, from our perspective, there haven't been any issues there in terms of kind of data issues. We're essentially kind of collating what's already there and providing our own assessment through a human rights lens. So hopefully that's helpful, maybe in answering that question. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Camilla. Frida, over to you.
Thank you. I'd like to zoom in on the question on how these tools could be helpful in places where there's maybe less appetite to collaborate and open up information. And I think Karen's point about open data is important there. When the data is open and more easily reusable, that sets the foundation to say, well, these exist. These are from open sources, these are publicly available. But then there's a wider thinking needed around that. So what does it mean if there is, say, no response to this? If there is no implementation whatsoever, how can this be gathered? How can civil society maybe take a monitoring role, or how could others be involved in monitoring what happens to these often public commitments or recommendations that would serve as an entry point to start conversations if there is no response? But I think the fact that information will exist will not translate into change on its own. So I think it's the strategizing, organizing, and coalition building around this that is important, and again see how open tools like this could support that. And it may not be the best strategy, but it can be a viable strategy. And I think that's maybe the interesting part, to have that as part of a wider toolkit. But I don't think there can be an expectation that having more information will lead to better action on its own. I think there's a lot of things that need to happen in between. And it's important to think this through throughout the whole process.
Very good. Thank you so much, Frida. Let's go to Tanzia Haq. I can see that you still got your hand raised. If you'd like to pose the question now, please.
Hi, can you hear me?
Very well.
Okay, I'm so sorry. I already asked a question in the chat box, but I had another question. So my question is, I'm very new to this topic of data tracking for human rights organizations, and having this, it's sort of something that I'm completely unfamiliar to this terrain, but I would love to learn more, which is why my question is to Camilla. Since you showed us how you've taken this technology and you've showed us how you've implemented it, and all the organizations that have participated in taking part in providing data for sharing amongst organizations along different human rights issues in your country, I was wondering, so when you think about implementing like the training involved and the this is something that since it's new to me, I'm sure it's new to a lot of other people who are listening in at this moment. So how did you approach, providing the training to like government officials as well as people from civil societies? Like, how would you approach training people or familiarizing people to this kind of technology so that it's most efficiently used? I think that's like, I'm sorry if I'm not wording this correctly, but that's like the area that I'm most curious about, like how you have managed to decided on the different groups of people who should be the primary people made familiar so that they can take the next steps forward in getting all the data in one place. So yeah, that's my question. Thank you.
Very good, Tansi. I think, Camilla, if you already have a question, we can go with this as it was directly brought to you. So the question of promotion and training behind the tracking tool, and as it's such a new tool, I think that was why you were pointed out by Tanzia.
Yeah, sure. Happy to answer that. So our capacity building is very much focused on enabling people to use the tracker as opposed to kind of feeding data into it. So it's probably worth just clarifying that at the start. But we're trying to reach a range of different users, as Tansi said. So we have to think quite carefully about tailoring our training for the different audiences. So we've got a kind of, I guess, a pro forma training that we then tailor depending on who we're delivering it to. And we've got, we've done some sort of stakeholder mapping firstly to identify who our primary audiences are, who we want to be able to use the tool. And that ranges from kind of people who already have a high level of understanding of the international human rights system to people who aren't as familiar with it. So in some of our trainings, we have to start with a sort of, back to basics. What is the international human rights system? What are the treaties that the UK signed up to? What are the recommendations? And we use the information on the tracker to kind of walk people through that so that they can see that in future, if they want to know more information, they can just go to the site and find that out. And then we very much want people to understand how they can use the tracker in their work. So we try to think about case studies that are relevant to, let's say we're working with a civil society organization that works with violence against women and girls. We'll look at how they can find information specifically about UN recommendations on that topic. We'll talk about projects that they may have worked on and how give them the opportunity to use the tracker to find information and think about how it would be relevant to their work. And we try to do some follow-up afterwards to, find out, since the training, how have people actually used the tool, and then building that into the training we provide in future to other participants. So it's sort of quite an iterative process, and also one that is, as I said, tailored to whoever our audience is. So, parliamentary staff who work on we've got a joint committee of human rights, and they work on, scrutinizing the government's human rights record. They have very different kind of need and understanding to a grassroots level civil society organization that doesn't already have a good understanding of human rights, but works on these issues and would find it valuable to know how the human rights system is relevant to them. So hope that's useful in answering that.
Thank you, Camilla. That was, no, I mean, I'm replying for Tansi's sake now, but I think that was a great response. So I have one other question. This was also directed at Camilla, but I think this also involves, well, the three other tools and the two panelists present, but the digital human rights tracking tools in general, and that is, does the tracker include relevant case law from whether it's the Inter-American, African, European system, and reports of special rapporteurs? So in a way, this question might be read as a sort of where do you stop and how do you stop, and what kind of mechanism does one developer put itself as limit or as focus? I think if I can see that you're all nodding, so perhaps we start with Friedhelm, Corinne, and then Camilla.
So there's different databases that cover these, and I think it's sort of speaking to the earlier point of silos and that exists to some extent, because I think that more connection would definitely be desirable. So there are databases that bring together case law from different African human rights mechanisms. There are databases that bring together case law from the Inter-American Commission and Court, and of course there's this UDOC as the Council of Europe resource that brings together everything the Council of Europe. If you were to look cross-regionally just on case law alone, you'd probably struggle right now unless you have access to some of the very expensive commercial databases that may bring that together. So there's definitely a need for better connection, but of course there's also, I think that's important to note, a lot of value in curating focus collections for different audiences, because I think sort of speaking to dedicated user needs is also important, and the broader you go, the more difficult that gets. So I think there is value in the current system, but more connection is hopefully something we'll be seeing more of.
Thank you very much. Corinne, if you have, we're about to end, so if 1 minute or so, if possible.
Sure, 1 minute, promise. So now, one of the things I think, and this is a very good question, is that of course for the Universal Human Rights Index, which is the global portal that the OHHR is offering, here we're now hoping to explore to actually include jurisprudence. Because again, you have one user want to go to one place to find and being able to download information. So we're now exploring how to do really, behind the scenes to put this together, which of course the countries that then want the NRTD, this is a request also from states, that they will also then get these individual communications and the decisions. So it's going to be, of course, much easier to follow up on the decisions and the remedies that are taken. So just to share that this is really how we're thinking to connect the different channels of information to make it more accessible. So thank you.
Thank you, Corinne. And Camilla, if you have any response to the question.
Yeah, I mentioned this briefly earlier when I was talking about challenges, which is really just about, having a clearly defined scope and purpose of the tool. And for us, we were particularly trying to address the kind of, making the UN human rights mechanisms and the many different recommendations received more accessible to people, and for there to be kind of better holistic scrutiny of those mechanisms. So for that reason, we kind of limited the scope of our own tool. But it is a really good question about kind of, what should be covered. And all I can say is that in our case, it was decided that we would limit it to those mechanisms for both kind of resource and clarity of purpose of the tool, I suppose.
Thank you so much, Camilla. And as we have just a couple minutes left, I think we will close here the Q&A session. Just a few more remarks from my side before concluding. So as we've seen, tracking tools are often seen as a sort of panacea for the reporting burden. A state or any institution can install such a tool, and when a report is due, you press a button and the job is done. This is of course not the case, as we've seen today, and I'd even say that it would be dangerous to entertain such thoughts. There should always be, in a way, a level of individual and collective input to the process of clustering, tracking, and reporting. And over automation, in a sense, might only serve to impede implementation in a different manner to that of the reporting burden. As today's conversation has shown, there is still room to discuss around the best ways to expand the tools which currently exist. And the Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights, the Equality and Human Rights Commission of Great Britain, Huridocs, Impact OSS, as well as countries such as Paraguay. We have not mentioned this today, but their digital tracking tool, Humore Plus, is an absolute leader in the field as well as Samoa with Sadata, deserve recognition for blazing the trail, especially for the comprehensive approach they have all adopted and the willingness to increase state accountability and transparency. The global interest in such software solutions and the maturity of such tools indicate that, as I said plenty of times today already, it is only a matter of time before these are the rule rather than the exception at the national level. And bearing in mind the potential this has for transforming the implementation of human rights and the development agenda, this is an exciting prospect, and which is why us at the Geneva Human Rights Platform are excited to explore this field further in the coming months with other dedicated activities. Before closing, may I also announce the upcoming Human Rights Conversation, which will be organized by Dr. Anna Beduski, Associate Professor of Law at the University of Exeter and Associate Research Fellow here at the Academy. And this next conversation will focus on the implications for data privacy and human rights of vaccine passports or digital green certificates. And quite a timely topic, may I add, for those of us planning to travel during the upcoming sunny season. So with this, I close the meeting. A big word of thanks to all you panelists and of course to the Geneva Human Rights Platform team, Felix Kirschmeier, Yasmin Arias and Chloe Naret for their great help in making this event possible. Thanks a lot, and see you in July for the next Human Rights Conversation. Have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.